Hello, I'm Dr. Garrett Boyer. Welcome back to this week's episode of Gospel Minded, where we spend a few minutes talking about themes related to psychology and behavioral health as they emerge out of the gospel reading for the week. And here we are, now the third week in Advent. Very exciting. So this again is by no means a replacement for work that you might do with a clergyman or therapist, but at the same time, definitely there are themes that come out of the Gospels that relate to behavioral health, and that is indeed the case today as well. Third Sunday of Advent is again focusing on John the Baptist, and if not my favorite scripture reading, today's Gospel is one of my favorites, and I think one of the reasons I like it so much is because there's a fairly famous piece of music called The Record of John, which was written by a guy named Orlando Gibbons, and it's essentially a musical version of the gospel we hear at Mass today. And at the end of that song, there's a very dramatic part by the soloist where they emphasize the end of today's gospel. Make straight the way of the Lord. Make straight the way of the Lord. And I just want to focus on those four words, make straight the way. Make straight the way. Because whether we are trying to make straight the way of the Lord and cultivate a better relationship with God, whether we are trying to make straight the way at work and get a promotion, whether we're trying to make straight the way at home and have better relationships with our family or friends or significant others, whatever it is, a lot of the times the way doesn't always seem so straight, does it? A lot of times, for anything in life, it seems there are winding turns and hills and obstacles, mountains perhaps, things that seem like they kind of get in our way. And that way that we're hoping to make straight is sometimes kind of crooked. But here's the thing, because I do believe that for a lot of situations, there are in fact obstacles and challenges and difficulties, yes. But all too often, a lot of the challenges that we face and a lot of the things that make our way crooked are of our own designing. A lot of times I can get in my own way. And so what I want to talk about today is just some of the more common things that I have observed as a psychologist when patients talk to me. These are some of the common ways that patients will get in their own way. And I know that I am guilty of this, and I'm pretty sure you are too, because we're human beings, and this is some material that we all have to kind of wrestle with. But what do you think the most common one is? What is the most common way that we would get in our own way? I think for a lot of folks, it's procrastination. And maybe not just procrastination, putting something off, but this sort of misrepresenting or misprioritizing, we'll say. Perhaps we have a big project or a big task that we have to complete, and it's overwhelming perhaps, and a lot taxing with our mental energy, with our time. And so there are other things that we can do or should do, and we'll try and justify, like, well, I can't do this big project now because I got to knock out all these little things. And in our mind, that helps us to feel a little bit better. Like, I'm still getting stuff done. I'm still meeting the mark and getting things checked off the list. That's great. But we can play some games with ourselves, and we know deep down that we're putting off something that we should probably just be trying to tackle and grab by the horns and start working on and working through. Because I think for plenty of folks, procrastination doesn't always look like, you know what, I'm just not going to do it. I'm going to wait till the last minute. I don't get the sense that that's where most people are at. I think what happens more often is there's something that is big and seems overwhelming, and rather than diving into it, they'll kind of soothe their conscience or ease their mind by doing something else. Not unimportant, but just not what they know they need to be eventually getting at. And then what happens is when it gets close to deadlines, or when we're close to the finish line and the work hasn't been done or the thing hasn't been accomplished, then we start feeling pressured and stressed, and that takes a burden, or that leaves a burden and takes a toll on us, just psychologically, always. Another thing that I've observed a lot is not recharging our battery in the most helpful way. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people talk about how tired they are, or just how exhausted they find themselves, be it physically, not having enough sleep, emotionally, just feeling kind of spent, putting themselves out for others. And yet when they have the chance to address some of these things, they don't take advantage of it in the most helpful way. And I'm guilty of this too. I'm very tired, and yet I'll find myself staying up late at night watching TV, or I find myself mentally exhausted. And this could be something that perhaps you've experienced too, just mentally exhausted, and we keep kind of driving on, even though we might have the opportunity to rest in that way. So I think not recharging the battery in a helpful way or in an appropriate way is another big way that I've observed a lot of folks kind of get in their own way, and that's what makes some of that path crooked and hard to navigate. Another big one I've observed is expectation management and perfectionism. I think we all want to try and do things the very best, and we all expect a lot from ourselves and probably expect a lot of others as well. But we should try and be conscientious that though we want to be perfect, we're not going to be perfect here and now, and neither is anybody else. And to have that expectation management piece of, I recognize that this might not be exactly the way I want it right now. This might not look exactly the way I had it in my mind, and that's okay. Most of the time, that's not as big a deal as we make it out to be in our head. So this tendency towards wanting things to look just so and be just perfect, the way we envision it in our minds, we have to have that expectation management piece that things may not go exactly as we plan, or it might look a little bit different than perhaps we intended or thought it would be, and that's okay, because that's part of life. And if we harbor those perfectionistic thoughts and those traits, it's a way that we can really, again, kind of get in our own way. And we don't want that, because we're trying to make straight the way. And then finally, I notice a lot of folks will sort of ruminate on past decisions and kind of think things through what had happened, and instead of learning from the mistakes and trying to grow from them, they'll kind of harbor this grudge towards themselves or towards others, that things worked out the way they did, and as a result they may not be willing to take a risk going forward or try something again. And again, this is a way that we can kind of limit ourselves and hold ourselves back. So how do we address some of these obstacles? How can we make straight the way? A couple of thoughts come to mind. For one, I think we can try to rewrite the narrative in our head. It's very easy to get stuck up in between our ears, say with the idea of procrastinating or putting off important tasks. I'm feeling overwhelmed, and I don't want to try and take on this project if I can't, say, get it all done in one shot, for example. There are a ton of reasons why we might procrastinate, but if we can rewrite that narrative in our mind a little bit, and kind of coach ourselves to recognize, okay, this doesn't all have to be done at one time, or the perfectionistic thing. If we can coach ourselves to think and recognize it might not look exactly the way that I want, but it can look very similar to what I want, and that'll be okay. It'll still get the job done. It'll still meet the mark. if we can do those things, rewrite that narrative in our head, that'll go a long way to helping us make straight the way. We should set realistic goals for ourselves. Again, maybe this ties into that perfectionism piece. We want to be realistic with whatever it is we're trying to wrestle with or tackle or approach. If it's a goal that's too lofty or too high, we're likely going to set ourselves up for failure and for disappointment. So I think the SMART goals are excellent, and if you've not been exposed to SMART goals before, I encourage you to go look it up. It's some really good stuff. And then finally, we can be patient. Be patient with yourself. You know, I think about the gospel reading for today, getting to that point of John the Baptist. Look at all of the Old Testament, through Genesis, the historical books, the prophets. It took a long time to get to the point where the Lord was ready to manifest himself. And look at you and where you are at on your journey. There's a good chance that where you're at today is very different than where you were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It's a process. It's a journey. And some of these things that I've talked about are the kinds of things that we will be working through and working on for the rest of our lives. And that's okay. Keep fighting that good fight. Be patient with yourself. This is all perfectly compatible with making straight the way. And that's what we're trying to do. So I hope this has been helpful for you. Again, just some thoughts that came to my mind. And I know that I find myself thinking about these things often, and you probably do as well. So I wish you all the best. Again, thank you for joining me, Dr. Garrett Boyer, hoping that you will make straight the way. Thanks for listening to Gospel Minded. Take care.